Hi, and welcome to the Heart Leader Podcast, where heart and mind align. I am your host, Amber, and today I am joined once again by the amazing Chelsea Kunde. She was here once before, but she was sharing something that she does that is very near and dear to our hearts that's a little different than what she's going to talk about today. And that's her nonprofit, Wigged Out. And you can go back and watch all the details on that episode and the amazing nonprofit she has that is dedicated to helping women and men and children get amazing wigs and hair pieces, hats, scarves, you name it. She takes care of all of that through that nonprofit. But today she's going to talk about the business that she has, helping families through an organization called Building Blocks. Chelsea has a depth of knowledge helping families come together and understand how to be this amazing unit that can move forward together from this connected space in so many ways. And if you check out her website, which we're going to make sure is posted all over the place, you can see the depth of knowledge and skills that she has in this, but I don't want to keep talking because I want her to share her expertise with us right now. So Chelsea, thank you for joining us again.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be back, and I had so much fun the first time. So it's nice now to be back talking about Building Blocks family, and it's good.
Yeah, and I know we even touched a little bit on this when you were here the first time.
Yes, I know. It just kind of organically fell into some building blocks as well.
Yeah, because you do have just such a depth of knowledge. And when we talk about children who are going through very challenging times when it comes to, hair loss or battling something like cancer, you can't help but talk about
Sure.
how that impacts the family. And so building blocks came forward.
Yes.
But it isn't only when you're battling something challenging that
Right.
families start to have a little bit of a breakdown that can
Yeah,
happen.
totally.
And
Normal.
you are there for all of that. So can you talk a little bit about building blocks and what it is that you do, the
Sure.
services you offer?
Yeah, so Building Blocks Family is a consulting company essentially. And what I wanted to do was build services around loving family solutions. So essentially providing really practical parenting in the topics of sleep, discipline, and potty training. And if you think about the name Building Blocks, essentially I want to build on your foundation of parenting, starting with sleep in the beginning to then you get into discipline and potty training, but it all kind of goes hand in hand. And through that work, it's a lot of systemic work, working with the family. What's going to work for your family might be different than what works for my family. And how do we get you to the spot that you want to be? And so that's kind of how it started. I started my career doing behavior intervention, and then I went on and got my master's in marriage and family therapy. And I was in the traditional family therapy world for a while and I loved it. And then when I started having my own kids, I realized that I really loved this parenting coaching niche. And I wanted to kind of start my own thing. And that's how Building Blocks started. It got launched that way. And it's really grown from there. And so I do, some teaching and private consultations as well. And I have clients all over. So some are remote and some are local. And it's been a blessing. I feel like I learn just as much from my clients every day that I'm teaching them as well. So it's been great.
This episode of the Heart Leader Podcast was brought to you by Stephen Douglas. Stephen Douglas is one of the nation's leading boutique search and interim resources firms and has been recognized as a leader in identifying and providing access to top talent for clients since 1984. Whether it's a company preparing to go to the next level or a candidate looking for better opportunities, Stephen Douglas keeps the focus on the needs of the people they serve. They specialize in connecting the right talent to a company's needs while also understanding what the market demands. To learn more about this amazing organization, visit them at stephendouglas.com. From a parent standpoint,
Yes.
it's so helpful to have someone that you can turn to. because it can feel like the loneliest job
Totally.
in the world.
Yeah,
It really
absolutely.
can.
Yeah.
And even if you have a partner who's helping you,
Hmm.
you feel like you're on an island by yourself sometimes
Sure.
because you're in this unit and you just need someone to talk to,
Sure.
but you may not seek traditional therapy. It's
Yeah.
just someone who can relate to what you're going through.
Right. And can understand. I mean, even, I have two young girls myself, and I struggle with that. I struggle with, did I just do that right? Or how do I handle this situation? And I might know some of what the textbook's going to tell you, but sometimes that's not real life. And I like to provide to my clients really practical solutions and also just meet them where they're at. And also to just say, it's really hard being a parent, and you're going to get a lot right and you're going to get a lot wrong. And as long as you're working at it and giving your best, I mean, that's really all we can do. But I do think having somebody to talk to in that regard who's not sort of like, this is the only way to do it, but more of, it's really hard and let's come up with a solution together is how my mission is.
And that means everything to someone who feels like they're standing on that island by
Yeah,
themselves.
absolutely.
And so, to me, not only were you a heart leader because of what you're doing with Wigged Out, but helping send that boat to the
Yeah.
person on the island and say,
Yeah.
no, you don't have to be here by yourself. Come
No,
on, there's
right.
a whole group
Oh, right.
of us who are doing this,
Right.
and we understand. It is the hardest independent
Hmm.
job you will do.
Yes.
And so that means so much. And this month we're focused on communication. And when I reached out to you, that was one of the things I mentioned. Because when we think about communication with our kids and our
Hmm.
family, we often think about, how do I talk to my children?
Right.
Which is such a key component.
Yes.
But it's also, how do I talk to my partner
Hmm.
about what's happening with our children?
Sure.
And how do I talk to people outside of the family
Right.
about what I'm experiencing?
Right.
Because there's so much that is happening
Hmm.
inside of us when we're parenting.
Yes.
So, do you have, when we look at each of those layers, do you have tips or any ways that you would kind of walk us through? And we can break it down each one, because I know I just threw like three
Right.
at you
Yeah.
really quick. It's like,
No, I get it though.
yeah, it's
I
like,
mean, communication is so encompassing, right? Like it's
yeah.
okay, how do I speak to my partner? How do we speak to our children? How do we want our children to speak to us? How do we explain what we're doing in our house, maybe to grandparents or other people that are involved in their lives too? So it gets complicated. And I mean, first and foremost, I do think as a family unit, I mean, I call it like little family meetings. But I think it's helpful, kids or no kids, to be honest, when you're in a partnership with somebody, to just build in these times that you have little family powwows, right? Little family meetings where it doesn't become so formal. It just becomes a habit of, you know what, these things are working really well for us right now, and these things aren't. And I need help in that area. Or can we come together? And it doesn't look picture perfect like that all the time. But the more you do it, the more natural it becomes. And so with partnerships, and I practice this in my own marriage and like with the kids as well, that my husband and I will have powwows together. Like, what is happening? We need help. And, okay, what are you seeing? What am I seeing? This is where I'm struggling. And sometimes maybe we're talking, you start sort of in an argument, and then it flushes out, or maybe you don't start in an argument and it's just this like wonderful, that's okay. That's all communicating and all good. And as long as you have that resolution at the end, that's good. And then we bring in my kids too. So they're privy to a lot of these conversations too. And sometimes they're not the prettiest conversations, but we have to involve them in that as well. And I do think there's closed door conversations. That's good. Like I always tell my clients, hammer it out after bedtime, but then afterwards come back together as a family and say like, hey guys, like bedtime's been really challenging. That's a time of night that I want to enjoy, and I want to enjoy putting you down at night, and it's been hard. And I think you could say that to a 2-year-old, and you can say that to a 10-year-old. And is the 2-year-old going to fully understand it? No, but they're going to appreciate that you're telling them like, we got to make a change here. Just like the 10-year-old would too. And so sometimes I think those powwows are like the most beneficial thing that we can do in a family unit.
Okay. So how would you start that? I think that for me was always the most challenging
Right.
when my 3-year old was like screaming at
Right.
the top of his lungs at me, taking that breath
Yeah.
and not being triggered.
Oh, yeah.
That's the hardest thing because you have your job, you
Hmm.
have your partner who's already like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And then to have that opportunity to not just be triggered and react, but to, and as you said, sometimes it's just messy and
Yeah.
that's going to
Yeah.
happen.
It's going to happen.
And to not like hold yourself to those few times that
That's
you're
right.
triggered,
Of course.
but
Because you're human.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
And your
forgive
kid,
yourself.
well, and your kids need to see that too. I always say this to my girls. I'm like, I'm 37, almost 38, and I don't get it right every time. I don't get frustrated and I sit calmly and take a deep breath and then talk to them nicely. That doesn't happen to me all the time either. And I've been on this world for almost 38 years. I don't expect my 5-year-old to be able to do that either, right? Like she's still learning. So sometimes for me, having that perspective, now in the moment when I'm having a 4-year-old who's tantruming in front of me, it's not as easy to remember those things. And so, like you're saying, the more that I can take a deep breath and walk away and take what I call like a mom break, or a parent break, it doesn't matter, the better. Because you're gonna get triggered. There's no getting around that. Having insight into what your triggers are is really helpful. And um, when you have that insight, then you can say, okay, I know I'm getting triggered right now because my daughter's whining, for example. That's actually a really big trigger for me, whining. So I know I'm going to get triggered right now because she's whining. I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to count to 5 in my head. I'm going to walk away. And then I'm going to come up with how I'm going to respond to the whining. And so for me, it's having more strength-based language around that, meaning I will say like, hey, Reese, can you ask me that in a big girl voice? Or can you make your voice calm or strong like mine? However you want to word it, doesn't matter to me. Be genuine. Because I always say kids can, smell BS from a mile away. So be genuine in how you would normally speak to them. But I'm telling her how I want to see her behave instead of turning around, which what I would want to do and be like, stop whining, you're being annoying. Like that's what my triggering self wants to do. But if I can take a beat for a second and then have my sort of script in my mind, that's helpful. And we are dealing with, that's a real life example. We're dealing with a lot of whining. So I think my husband and I say in a day, 20 times a day for her to use a big girl voice. But we know that that's such a trigger to both of us. And we've come up with this phrase that we say to her, and we're both on the same page. And that just came out of, she's whining a lot. How are we going to handle this when we were both calm? So not in the moment, right? So she's not whining at dinner and my husband and I are like, what do we do? Blah, blah. She was already asleep. We were like, she's whining so much. What can we do to help? And then you kind of come up with a plan, which is so much better
Yes.
than in the moment.
And to do it together too,
Yeah.
to talk about it together in the calm
Yep.
and create a plan.
Yeah. And
It's
it's
unified.
And it's so hard, right? Being a unified parent is key. Like you need to be up here and your kids need to be underneath. It can't be like, Reese and I over here and Josh under here. Like Josh and I need to be the united ones up top. That is very challenging to do every day because one, we're different sexes. I'm raising the same sex. He's raising the opposite sex. We were raised in 2 different households. We have 2 different personalities. Obviously, I'm sure my background doesn't maybe help him feel confident sometimes in situations, or it's annoying. I mean, I'm not going to speak for him, but I'm sure. And so there's all of that that plays a part. But the more we practice having these conversations together and providing the feedback to our kids or the interventions we're going to use or the solutions where him and I are united, that's when it works the best. Not just if he's leading the way or I'm leading the way. It has to be where our kids are like, oh no, like mom and dad, they talk, they know what's going on. I can't sort of ask mom something, she says no, and then go to dad and he's going to say yes. And that you have to work at. That's just not a natural piece.
Yeah. And just like you said, kids can smell BS from a mile
Yeah.
away. They can smell separation in the
Oh,
ranks
totally.
from a mile away.
100%.
And
100%.
they will use that to get what they want
Yep.
in a heartbeat. And that's smart. I
Oh, it's
mean,
so smart.
you can't fault them for that.
No, again, like some people are like, oh, my child's so manipulative. I'm like, they're not manipulative. They're just smart. So they're
Yeah,
learning their environment. If they know that dad's always going to say yes for dessert, they're just going to ask dad, right?
yes,
Like
exactly.
that's not them being manipulative. That's them being smart. They're learning their environment. So the more that you can be united as parenting, the better. And of course, you're going to have your moments where you're not. And then show your kids you guys coming back together and then saying, you know what? I'm sorry that I yelled, or I'm sorry that I walked away when you were speaking to me, or I'm sorry that I changed the rule in the moment, right? Because sometimes that happens where you're like, dad said I could. And then you're like, oh no, the rules change sometimes. Like that just does happen. But if you can come back together and your kids see that conflict resolution, again, you're teaching them this is how you communicate when you're frustrated, when you're happy, when you're sad. And this is how you make things right too, which is a really important aspect that a lot of us didn't have growing up
Yes,
and didn't get to see that. And I think that that's a very, very important piece.
yes. The resolution part, I think,
Hmm.
is key.
Yes.
And even how to navigate in conflict,
Hmm.
too. And you were talking about, yes, there are behind closed doors
Sure. Of
conversations that
course.
need to happen. But I know in some situations, every conflict happens behind closed
Right,
doors,
right,
right?
right.
So in that situation, what advice do you as a consultant
Mhm.
give for teaching these kids how to navigate conflict if they're not seeing conflict?
Sure. And again, so, it is important to sit down with a partner and say, especially with raising kids, okay, this is how I was raised. These are the things I want to bring into raising my own kids. And these are the things I kind of want to leave behind. And then just having insight. This helps me too if I'm ever just frustrated, like, "Ah, why did that happen when I was growing up? Or why did that not happen?" That your parents do the best that they can. And that we really do hope I hope that my kids are better parents than I am, right? Like I hope every generation learns and gets better and better. So you want to start there. Like, okay, here's kind of the communication breakdown of what's going on. And if you were raised in a house where you never saw your parents argue or fight, you know that then once you get into your own relationship and you get into your first argument, because that's normal in relationships, you're going to be devastated. Like my parents never fought. They probably did. You probably just didn't see it. And so, what research has really shown us is that it's important not for kids just to see conflict, but to see conflict resolution. So, that piece is so important. And that piece is the message of even when you love somebody and you respect them, it's okay sometimes to get frustrated and mad. It's better to get frustrated and mad in a respectful way. You don't do that all the time. And when you hurt someone's feelings, you come back and apologize and then you move on. I mean, how many life lessons are you teaching right there without sitting down and lecturing them, right? Of like, you need to be nice, you need to say sorry, but you're really showing them, hey, you know what? Mom was not nice in the kitchen right there. And I'm sorry, to my husband. I'm sorry that I was just rude right there. And he say, it's okay. And we kiss and make up in front of them. They see that that's normal. That's what happens in relationships. Now I don't obviously want to be screaming all the time at my husband in front of my kids. No, of course not. But is that going to happen every once in a while? Of course. Is it going to happen every once in a while that I'm screaming at my kids? Of course. But the communication is also important for me to then go back to my kids and say, hey, Harper, you know what? Mom, I did not take a deep breath. I went from 0 to 100. And what do I tell you when you get mad? And she's going to tell me, walk away, take a deep breath. I'm going to say, and I didn't do any of those things. And I'm sorry for that. And that doesn't make me a bad parent. That just makes me a real parent. And that shift is so different generationally, for me and how our generation was raised. It just there wasn't as much apologizing, I guess, or the understanding of, yeah, I wasn't perfect in that situation, and here's what I would do differently. Does that make sense?
It does.
So,
Yes. And I agree. Every generation just seems to be improving because I
Yeah.
know like my parents' generation, it was kids are to be seen
Not heard.
and not heard,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so, and then my generation, it was you can express yourself,
Right.
but to
To a point.
limits.
Yeah.
Right.
To a
And
point.
to a point.
Yeah.
And then now it's even more like be expressive, be who
Right.
you are, embrace who you
Right.
are. And so we have seen these growths, but I do feel a large part of it is because there are individuals like you and others who are joining together to say, look, we can be better, we
Sure.
can show better,
Yeah.
and we can grow in these ways.
Yeah. You did just touch on something too. I always talk about with clients and with my own husband too, of just sometimes we the dial goes too far in one direction. So like we're trying sometimes to get away from like some of the old school ways. So we're like all the way over. And we really need to go in the middle, more, meet in the middle more, because I would argue probably our kids think that they can say whatever they want all the time, right? And like I'm so glad that they had this very open relationship with us. But I also, my husband and I are like, I would have never talked to my mom that way. Now, maybe if my mom was sitting here, she'd be like, oh no, you did. However, I don't think I did as much as my kids. I'm like, there you were not scared of me at all, you know? And I think that's okay. But I do think sometimes when we're looking at it, pulling some good from old school stuff and pulling some good from new school stuff and having that be the parenting solution is the perspective that I come from. You know, I do think that there should be rules and consequences and consistency and all that good stuff. But I do want to focus on communication and emotions too. And it's hard to find that balance. It truly is.
And I feel like that's the line most parents are
Yeah.
walking. It's like,
Right.
I don't want to squash you,
Right.
your creativity,
Right.
your uniqueness.
Right.
But at the same point, we're living in a society
Mm-hmm.
where we have to all balance
Mm-hmm.
and be together.
Right.
And that is one of the questions I desire to explore with you too, is how do you do that? Because I agree. I think it's not just in parenting, but in our society as a whole.
Sure.
We've kind of, the pendulum went from here and
Yeah.
whoa,
Exactly.
we're way over here
Yeah.
now, which is fairly normal if we're going to find the median
balance.
point,
Yeah.
right? We have to explore to understand where is the midpoint. But how do you, with children and with
Mm-hmm.
families, kind of explain that? Because we can get it
Yeah.
on an independent,
Right.
but when you're growing up in that world,
Right.
how do you explain that? We lived through the other side and now we're living through this side. They're only living through this.
Right.
How do you help them understand that?
I think it's challenging. And I think that I think sometimes it's trial and error, right? So there are things that we know that we want to do differently. I'm just speaking from my own experience that I want to do differently than maybe how I was raised. But there's things that I still want to do that my parents did too, that I'm like, no, that was amazing. That's the person that I am. That's why I'm, watching my husband's parents too. I'm like, no, that's why you're such a hard worker. That's why, I want to emulate a lot of those things now, but sometimes I fall back into what I just saw, okay. And then I'm like, oh, no, that's not how I want to parent this. I want to parent this a little bit differently. Again, I think half the battle into change is having insight into that change. And so even after the fact, knowing, you know what, I didn't handle that the way that I want to, and then making it right, I do think is half the balance of balancing that out. And then going back to those family meetings, even if it's like, hey, every anniversary, we sit down and we talk about what's going really well in our relationship and what could be worked on, and what's going really well in our family life and what can be worked on. And then those conversations just become really organic and second nature. And that communication piece doesn't feel so like foreign or like someone's in trouble, right? Like my wife's mad at me, so now we have to talk about our relationship. No, it doesn't have to be like that. It's just more like, hey, this is the strength of our marriage right now. And then these are the areas that we can work on. And that ebbs and flows with your season of life. I mean, truly, as your kids get older, you have different challenges, but you also have more freedom, right? Like they're not as needy. Well, that's great. So how does that evolve and change our relationship and how we're communicating? And I kind of took us down a different path, but
No, that's perfect though,
you
because
know,
that is part of it too. If you as a parent, like your only focus is your children,
right.
what do you do when your children begin to not have you
Hmm.
as their only
Right.
focus? And that is part of parenting,
That's right.
is beginning to understand that balance.
Right.
And I myself have seen friends who their life was being a mother. You
Sure.
don't see it as often with fathers.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are some. I
No,
have
I
not
hear you. Yeah.
experienced it.
Hmm.
But with the mothers that I've known, like their whole life was their child.
Hmm.
And the moment that child began to go off in their own direction, their sense of identity was gone.
Right.
So, what advice could you give to someone to have that healthy balance? Because again, that talks of the pendulum, right?
Yeah.
What do you do? How
Right.
can you support someone who's in that position? Because then you can become what they call a smother mother, right? Where
Yes.
you're like smothering the child
Yes.
who's attempting to leave the
Right.
nest.
And yeah, and because you don't want them to, because that's your part of your identity now too. And I think sometimes, in the very beginning, your kids, there's going to be that no matter how independent or you have other hobbies or working or whatever that looks like, because kids need so much in the beginning. But I do think to always be working on something for you, something for your relationship, and something for your family. And that's really difficult. And that's not something that you're going to do every single day. I remember when I was toying with like staying at home or going back to work, and I talked to my mother-in-law actually, and I was like, I'm such a perfectionist. And I just said, I don't know how you did it. I don't know how you gave 100% at home and 100% at work. And she gave me some of the best advice. She said, I didn't. There was days that home I was like nailing. And then there was days where work I was nailing. And you have to be okay with having 80% here sometimes in that bucket and 100% here, and that was just really great parenting life advice, because there are days that you're nailing it. You're like, I could have 10 kids. I'm like so good at this. And then there's other days where you're like, what happened? What did I do? I don't know. I don't know how to do this. That I think is very normal. And so having, self-care is used far too much that it sort of has like this triggering. I say self-care to a parent, and they're like, yeah, I know I need to be doing self-care. But what I mean more is like taking time for you at some point in a day, in a week, even, is so important. So this is so small, but for me, I have to wake up and have like a cup of coffee in the morning before anyone talks to me in my house, quite frankly. Maybe the dog I'll let talk to me, but and for me, that just sets me up to communicate better, versus if I get up as my kids are getting out of bed, I'm not going to communicate in a nice way. So sometimes it's just finding those little things that bring you joy and happiness and make you feel that it's not around the kids. Does that make sense?
It does.
But it's really hard. It's not easy.
Yeah.
And it'll change. So maybe when you have a newborn, it's your cup of coffee, or I always like to good shower cry.
Yeah.
Like I could cry in the shower and nobody would judge why I was crying. And then as they get a little bit older, like maybe you do get to go do that hour workout because it's easier, or, you could take a bubble bath and nobody's in your bathroom, probably all the people with young kids are like, what's that like? But you'll get there,
Because there's no privacy. Even if you lock a
That's
door,
right.
then
Little
they're
fingers
banging.
are underneath.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or they're just hitting it
Yeah,
constantly.
totally.
Yeah.
Exactly. But it changes, it evolves, so do you. But I think, having some of that communication piece there too with whoever's in your life, of like, I just need 10 minutes. I've had clients that call it like they just literally go drive around for 10 minutes and come back, and they've communicated that with their partner, and that works really well. So it'll look different for everybody, but it does go back to that communicating. And when you have kids, it's such a vulnerable thing, and you just have to be okay with saying like, I can't do it all. I need a little help. And that doesn't make you a bad parent. And that was something I had to tell myself.
Yes. Yes, because we do. And it isn't as though it was ever placed upon me.
No, yeah.
And that was the key thing for me that I had to
Yes.
realize. Nobody told
Yeah.
me that I had to do it all.
I know.
it's just like I felt like I had
Hmm.
to do it all
I know.
somehow.
Yeah.
And being willing to go, okay, then I have to change.
Right.
In order to be the best parent for my child, have to be willing to say, I don't have to do it all.
That's right. And that is hard.
It's so hard.
It's something I still struggle with every day of just whatever expectations that I am placing on myself, having to really learn, and I think you learn this just in age and maybe in confidence of being a parent too, of just, no, I don't have to do all of those things. Like that's not, it's okay if I have to pick up food tonight and I didn't make dinner. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's so small, but sometimes you put these expectations on yourself and you're communicating with yourself internally, but you're not saying those out loud. And I always find it so helpful when I just say like, oh, I know I fell short here. And I say that out loud. So then my partner's like, what? What do you mean? Like nobody expected you to do that. And sometimes you can hammer out things that way, in communicating, that's helpful too. And really kind of bringing it back to yourself. So anytime there's a disagreement, if you can use what you call like an I statement, I'm feeling this way versus you're making me feel this way, the conversation's going to go a lot better.
Yes. I found that too. And even being able for me to like journal some
Oh, I
things,
love that. Yeah,
it helped so much
that's
as
great.
I was raising my son, just so I could keep my thoughts straight for what was
Yes.
going on in my internal world. So I didn't make it his problem,
Yeah, that's so great.
right? Because I couldn't keep my thoughts straight sometimes when
Right.
you're like working. And at the
Yeah.
time I was going to school and I
Yeah.
was raising him, and
Right.
I was a single parent at the time. So I was like, I can't keep my thoughts straight.
Right.
I need to do something.
Yeah.
So I would write it down. And now I can look back on those journals and go,
I love it. You still have them.
yeah,
Oh, that's amazing.
how did I do all that I did
Yeah.
when I was doing it?
Yeah.
So it's a good thing to look back on, but it was the only thing that kept me sane for a little while.
Yeah.
And it helped teach my son positive, like self habits so
Absolutely.
he could
Absolutely.
utilize it at some point in his life too. I don't
Yeah.
think he uses it to this day, but
Yeah, but he
at
might
certain
one day
points,
too. You never know. But
yeah.
yeah, I think that's awesome.
So it is, as you said, it's by action, right? Our kids
Yeah.
absorb our actions far faster than they do our
Oh,
words.
100%.
So body
Yes.
language
Yep.
and actions are communication that we're sometimes not even aware of.
That's right. I always say too, I really kind of cringe sometimes when I'm thinking about how my kids will say something to the dog. I'm like, is that how I talk to the dog? Like
Yeah,
if I'm annoyed at the dog and then they're repeating how I'm saying it to the dog, I'm like, oh, I shouldn't talk to the dog that way. That is such a good example of how they just watch your behavior. If you have a 3-year-old and they pick up a pretend cell phone and they are playing independently and pretend play, and you hear them talking on the phone, right? And they mimic everything we say and do, for better or for worse.
they do.
And so I think that's such a good point with communication too, of when you sit down and you're communicating with somebody or your partner and they're listening to you and they're listening to how you talk about people. They're listening to when you're at a restaurant, how you're talking about people to the waitress and waiter. I mean, right? Like
Yeah.
it's all of those things that really do play such a part and a role, and things I think we just forget about because our day to day is so quick. So you bring up a really good point with communication oftentimes too is just them watching you
Yeah.
and learning.
And it's such a big thing. My son had made this one thing at school. It's like, what does my mom need?
Yeah,
And I love when they make these
me
little
too.
arts and
It's the
crafts
best.
things when they bring them home because you learn so much about yourself.
Yeah,
I
it's
was
so
like,
true.
because this one, he's like, what does my mom need? She needs her cell phone. She needs her pager.
Right,
She needs her laptop.
right.
And at the time, I was working
Yeah.
a job
Well,
where
and you did need those things,
I did,
right?
but she needs hugs and kisses from me was last on the
Yeah,
list.
yeah,
And I started crying
yeah. I'm sure that was hard. Yeah,
because it was my realization
sure.
that in his view, he came after all of those things.
Yeah,
And so it was my chance to like take a step back and go, what
Right.
am I going to do about this?
Sure.
Because my son should never feel like he comes after an inanimate object.
Right. Right. But
So,
what a powerful thing, right? And I think
yeah.
you're touching on, we're all going to have those like pivots in parenting, in how we communicate, in our relationships, where it's okay to have a pivot and it's okay to have those moments where it doesn't feel great, because that's how you make those great moments. And again, when you like are getting into bed at night and you're like, that was a really bad day, but what did we all learn from that, and how can we make it better the next day? Because sun comes up again, life keeps going. And kids, the beauty of kids is that they don't sit and like agonize over things as much as we do. And we can really, that can be such a strength of them. I'm not saying that they don't have their own feelings and emotions and think about things, but not like we do. They're not as jaded,
Yeah.
which is beautiful. And, we can really capitalize on that and learn something from them too.
Yeah, exactly. So, in what you provide
Hmm.
to parents, if I were to come to you and say, oh my gosh, Chelsea, I just got this from my son, I don't know how to address this, how to
Hmm.
make that pivot, what would you say to me? Because I know in that moment, like I was pretty crushed
Sure.
when I read that. And I'm like, I was somewhat lost because I did feel caught between my job, which
Sure.
needed my focus, and providing what my son needed. So, what advice could you have given me at that point to help me make that transition and not beat myself up? Because I was Jim carrying it and kicking my own butt
Totally.
for the longest
Yeah,
time.
I'm
I mean,
sure.
yeah,
I'm sure. I mean, one, I think I always love a good reframe, right? So, reframing a little bit of what he put in that box was because he looked at you and he knew like you were a hard worker and you were working hard for your family, and that those things were helping, you to feel good too. So I would reframe that a little bit. And because I don't think he was doing it in a way of like, she needs these things, and then I'm at the very bottom, right? I just think he was like, yeah, my mom's a really hard worker and she needs these things. I would have reframed that for you a little bit too, to kind of see it from a different lens, and not see it as such all negative, because I don't think it's all negative. And then where do we find the balance for you where you're going to feel like, okay, I'm giving enough at home and I'm giving enough at work? And that might look really different for different people, right? So even like block scheduling is a really big new trend, especially with people working from home, where you block 2 hours here for this and 1 hour there for that. But I think that reigns really true with working parents, specifically, because your clock's sort of never off in any camp, especially with all the electronics we have. And so for myself, sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm going to try to put my phone down, which is really hard, for an hour, right? Like literally put it away, take my iWatch off so I don't get the ding ding, of
yeah,
everything going on, and be really present, because it's quality over quantity with kids. Research shows, I mean, 10 to 20 minutes of one on one time a day has a super positive impact on behavior. 10 to 20 minutes. We all have 10 to 20 minutes. That might feel overwhelming if you have a bunch of littles running around. So maybe I tell people do it 1 to 2 times a week. But that's how I would tell you, like, we can do that. We can take 10 minutes a day where we're putting those things away, and we're going to call it, what's your son's name?
Joshua.
We're going to call it Joshua time. This is your time. You tell me what you want to do. We're going to set a timer for 20 minutes. It's just one-on-one time, you and I. And that is so huge for them. And so that's all I would tell you to do, because you probably were doing everything great. It just needed in your mind to be reframed, and then putting a little bit of side time that you all had just for you. Not that you weren't already doing that, but call it something that mentally, for me as a mom, for you as a mom, for Joshua, for my girls, that means so much, that one-on-one time. And sometimes just naming it for us, like we're already doing it, so let's give it a name, is going to make all the difference.
That's amazing. And I think it works for our partners too,
Yeah, definitely.
having date night
Yes,
so that it's separate from our family time.
that's right.
And so, your building blocks,
That's
to
right.
go back to what you're saying.
That's right.
Even the name of your organization talks about everything is a building block to create the whole.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. And having those date nights is so important. And again, if you can't get out, you can have a date night at home because it's so often that you might just be sitting on the couch and everyone's scrolling on their phone. And but you can really say, like, we're going to have a date night. We're going to put the kids down. We're going to cook dinner. We're going to put our phones away. That hour is that really quality time and you're giving it a name. And maybe you spend every evening together, but when you're really mindful of that time together and you've given it a name and it's date night, it does make a big, big difference.
So we have all this discussion and we have the groundwork and our inner family is going great.
Okay.
But often we get knocked from the side
Yep.
from external family or external friends who just don't understand
Yeah.
what's going on.
Right.
And that can throw us for a loop.
Mm-hmm.
How do you help individuals not get thrown off track when you have someone who desires to get in the ear
Right.
and start saying, but you're not doing this right, or you're
Right.
not, why don't you do this?
Right.
Or really assessing, or because it can cause you to just start reevaluating everything you're doing if you're not grounded
Oh, totally.
and nope, this is how my family operates and
Right.
we're happy this way.
Yeah. And realistically, you're not super grounded in that when you're a parent because you're learning as you go. And some of what you might have thought how I was going to be maybe changes once you actually have children. And so I do think that that is such a challenging piece, whether it's your own family's insight, friends, in-laws, distant relatives, whatever that kind of
Or
looks
the
like.
internet.
The internet. Yeah, I mean, the amount of information out there that makes you feel so guilty sometimes, or I'm not doing that, or I should be doing that. And I always tell, everybody that pick the things that you feel are really, really important to you. Like these three kind of like buckets of whatever that looks like, right? So for me, it's really important. This is very small, but when my kids were really little, this was really important that I didn't let my kids have electronics at the table. Okay. But like when we were out to dinner, that was just really important to me. I didn't want I wanted them to converse. Family dinner is really important to me. So, and my husband as well. And we are very strict with that, right? But the world around us is not very strict with that. And so it gets challenging. It gets challenging when you're out with friends, and it gets challenging with family, and it gets challenging kind of like what you see on the internet too. And then, of course, practical reasons. We've been to dinner sometimes and we're like, you know what? We're going to sit and enjoy everybody. We've been here for an hour. Okay, now I'm going to give my kid my phone because it's taught me to not be so rigid in that. I'm using that example because I do think that I was pretty grounded in that frame of thought. I think everybody has their opinions around it. It's hard to stick to it. And it's hard to not, I don't know, be flexible in it as well. And so that was just a pivotal like parenting moment for me of saying, okay, this is something that was really, really important to me. We followed through with it. There was probably judgment around, but now I've kind of, changed the rule if maybe we've been somewhere too long. So I think canceling out the noise for stuff that's very, very important to you, I think is good. The rest I would hear and listen and then take with a grain of salt, and know that typically everybody's coming from a good place and wants to help. But sometimes it's just unwanted, right? Like it's unsolicited advice. And that happens all the time as a parent. Or, your kid's acting up and then, somebody might say like, they must be tired or they must be hungry. And sometimes you're like, they're just acting up and it's okay. And I don't want you to make it better right now. It's a lot of that, right? Like, we've all been there. We've
Yeah.
all been there. And just to kind of, okay, these are the things that are important to me. The other things aren't. So whatever, let them give me their advice and I'm just going to do what I want to do with it. And then also communicating to family, because sometimes that's all it takes is, I just want you to listen and I don't want advice right now. And you can say that in a way that is nice people will be receptive of that too. Of like, okay, like she wants to just vent and not like my sister and I do that a lot because we're both parents and we have differences in our parenting. And sometimes we just learn to say, like, I just need a vent. And then other times I'm like, can you give me a solution? And that's been really helpful in our communicating, but that's taken time, to get there. I wish I had like, here's 4 ways to, but I don't because I think it's challenging depending on the relationship.
But I do like being able to be transparent enough of,
Yeah.
like, look, I'm not looking for a solution right now.
Yeah.
There is no seeking of you solving this.
Right.
I just need someone I can share with.
Right.
And I love you and I know that you'll listen to me.
Yeah, exactly.
So can you just listen and allow me to flow through this externally so I can find my own way through it?
That's right. Yeah, that's
And
right.
that might be all that's needed.
Yeah.
And that'll be enough.
Yeah.
Or if you are looking for a solution, like, hey, can you help me solve this?
Right.
But let me tell you everything
Yeah.
before you solve it.
Yeah.
Or help me solve it.
Right.
And don't give me the solution, help me solve it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, help me solve it. Yeah, exactly. Because a lot of times everybody just wants to kind of vent a little bit, right? And it's the same in relationships where you might have one partner that's just a total problem solver, and stereotypically that's typically men, and then women just that's not, maybe I go to my husband and I just want to, no, I'm venting, and he's like, here's a solution. I'm like, I don't want a solution. I just want you to, just
don't solve it for me.
Yeah, don't solve it. But that's in his, he wants to solve it. Like, we're here. You got a problem? I'll fix it for you, and that comes from a sweet and loving place. And so realizing that too, and then just me being able to vocalize and say like, no, I just need to talk about it. I know we've talked about it 5 times, but I just need to talk about it one more time. Yeah. And I think that that's very normal and natural too. And you get to that place of communicating with somebody and understanding to where then you can say that, and there's going to be times you just swallow it down, walk away, take a deep breath, and you're like, okay, I'm not going to take that advice too.
Yeah.
That's healthy too sometimes.
I agree. And allowing yourself to get to that place, I feel, with someone versus just like, nope, I'm cutting off this relationship.
Right. That's right. And sometimes you can just build communication boundaries, right? Like, I'm not going to talk about parenting with that person. We have a lot of other things we can talk about, but maybe that doesn't, I don't walk away feeling good ever. And that's the same with social media, right?
Yes.
So only follow people that make you feel good. Unfollow people that don't make you feel good. It's such a simple concept. I had this one other parenting account I was following, and it just like unnerved me sometimes. And then finally I'm like, I'm unfollowing this. Unfollowed, and it's just really helped a lot. And so I think sometimes that's so simple and so silly that I waited so long to do that. But I do think social media can either make you feel really good or make you feel really bad. And if it's making you feel bad, there's an unfollow button for a reason,
Yes.
Truly.
And
truly.
That's a great thing to teach your kids too.
100%. If you're around somebody that doesn't make you feel good, don't be around that person. You can walk away. You don't have to hang out with that person. That's not being mean. That's just protecting yourself and having good boundaries. And yeah.
Especially on social media, because again, going back, for most of the individuals who are our age or older, we had some period where we didn't have social media so prevalent in our lives, right?
Yeah.
So we know what it's like to not be so inundated with social media.
Yes.
But for our children, they don't have that experience.
No.
Their way of socializing is or will be through some means of social media and personal contact.
Right.
And so setting up those healthy boundaries around that means of communication and interaction will be so important. And that's not something we ever had to do.
No. So we're navigating that too for the first time. And we're navigating our own relationship with social media, and it's addicting. It's totally addicting. And so how do, we model our own behavior and communicate to them? I mean, it's so complicated.
Yeah.
And it will be different for everybody. Everybody's threshold with electronics and social media is going to be different. And I don't think there's just like a perfect equation. I think it is person to person, kid to kid too. Um, but it's hard and complicated. So the more conversation, the better, right? I mean, we're talking about communication, but I just think there's never enough conversation, truly.
Yeah. And it makes sense then why each one of your clients, it is individual
Yes.
and very tailored to what their needs are. So you don't
Yes.
walk in and it's like, here's my
No.
program, and you're going to fit into this
Yes.
program, and that's that. You tailor it
Yes.
to what is happening within their family
Hmm.
and what their needs are.
Yeah. And what's going to work for them. Because that's the beauty of life and people. What's going to work for one might not work for the other. Of course, there's certain behavioral principles that are the same, but every time I go into somebody's home, the services look different.
And how would someone get a hold of you if they're seeking support in this way?
Sure. So my website's buildingblocksfamily.com, and my contact information's on there. I mean, you can get in touch with me on there. I have Instagram and Facebook as well, Building Blocks Family, that I'm super responsive with. All my contact information's on my website and on social media too.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you post really great stuff through all of those avenues.
Yes, I like to think I don't overpost, but I post the perfect amount. But yes, I want to be able to provide free content, as well as if you obviously are seeking a service, I'm happy to do that. And I have classes in person. I have online class options too, because some people just want like more of a classroom setting. I obviously do one-on-ones as well with families, and that works nicely too. I have a blog that has a lot of free content on there as well. But I truly think when you are looking to work with anybody, you want to be able to jive with them. And so hopefully when you go to my social media, you'll learn, not only my philosophy and how I work and what I think about these topics, but also who I am as a person, because I think that's really important, and is a really fun aspect of my job. Because when you're in traditional therapy, you're more reserved, because you're not just sharing all of your life, but this different way of providing services, I get to be very open and share myself and my family, and that's been really fun too.
It definitely takes a different path than
Yes.
traditional
Yep.
therapy.
Totally.
Not that traditional therapy isn't wonderful
No,
and
it's
serves
great.
a place in the market, but
Yes.
this is so much more interactive, and you get to know people and the
Yes.
whole family unit in just such a different way.
Yes, definitely.
And you said you can do this remotely too. So,
Yes.
like for our global community
Hmm.
here, if there are those who are even located in a different country,
Yes, I have clients like that, and all over the US. I mean, going back to technology, I mean, we're so blessed with Zoom and things that allow it to be really easy to provide my services to anybody that needs it. So yeah, I would say probably half of my clients are remote, which is really fun.
that's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you
Yes.
again for being
Oh, I
here
loved being here. Thank you for having me.
and for such a transparent and open and honest conversation.
Okay.
And for those of you in our community, if you are parenting and you at any point feel like you are one standing on an island, just feeling like you could use some support, know that you are not alone. I know what it was like to feel like that. And Chelsea has been there as well. That's why she developed this amazing company so that she can share her knowledge, her breadth of skill set. So don't hesitate, reach out, explore her website, get to know her through social media, and feel free to reach out to her through any of the avenues that we post below, or through any of the avenues through her social media, her website, or any which way that you feel comfortable. Until next time, I am your host, Amber, with the Heart Leader Podcast. Don't forget, we have a ton of free resources that are available over on the Heart Leader Toolbox. And this month we have the Effective Communication Workbook. It will include some wonderful tips and tools that you can get for yourself to really begin to navigate those communication skill sets as well. We look forward to seeing you in the Suivera community. You've been listening to the Heart Leader Podcast with your host, Amber, where heart and mind align. Tune in weekly as we take a deeper dive into what it means to be a heart leader. Ready to take the next step? Join us and over 1 million people worldwide who've united in creating this global movement of love. Become a heart leader for today and tomorrow. Learn more and connect with us at suivera.org.